All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are continually exploring the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and answering your questions along the way. Today, I am bringing back Matthew Brown from Schoox. So he is joining me back on I was going to say tank, but it's not the tank. I have no idea. I got to think of a good word for that. But anyway, Matthew's back, and we're going to be talking about talent development and all things related to that, really specifically kind of highlighting how we've seen that change and evolve over the last, 18, 20 months, something like that, and how it'll probably continue changing for the next, I don't know how much longer we're going to be dealing with this. But anyway, we're going to have a lot of fun. If you've joined the two of us before, it's a fun conversation. But before we get into it, let's get everybody involved and included. For those of you who are watching, you can join in the comments. And also, I'd encourage everybody to join in the comments throughout. Add your questions, insights. We'll bring them in live. But first things first, where are you in the world today? So comment in if you're joining. Matthew, the background, I feel like maybe some of the objects on the shelves have moved or something, but I feel like it's a familiar environment.
It's mostly the same. I've rotated the room a little bit, brought a few new friends to play, kind of change out the potato heads every once in a while, keep it fresh.
Keeping it fresh. All right, but where is it? Where is it? In case people don't know where. I mean, obviously it's a room. It's a room, I'm guessing, in your house.
It is. It's a room in my house in Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas. All right. See, I feel like mine looks more kind of Texas-y with this right here. Kind of has that like rustic Texas look, but I'm not. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, not Texas. So we're on other ends of the country here. And I don't have any cool potato heads. I just have Fred, the friendly houseplant, here to keep me company. That's all I got. Nothing quite as cool as you.
The potato heads got rid of the plant that was in here.
Switched them out for something more entertainment. There you go. Well, you know what? I've seen that happen. It happens. Okay, so today's icebreaker question, which actually stems from last week's conversation. I had a conversation with Blake Bozarth, and we were talking about leadership development, and one of the things we talked about was, what's your 5 to 9? And I said, that is such a great question. So I stole it, and I told him I was going to steal it. So it's not like I legitimately stole it. He said I could steal it. But the point is, I thought, what a great icebreaker question. So today, Matthew, your icebreaker question is, what does your 5 to 9 look like?
It looks very different day by day. The common theme is 5 to 9 is really about that decompression. Right from the day, it's turning off the day, moving into things that happen after the workday is done. So sometimes it's just, let's get in the kitchen and bake. Let's just let off some stress. Sometimes it is a lot of playtime with the dog. Occasionally a video game or two pops in, maybe a little sitting down at the piano.
All right. You got a diverse set of things you got going there. Video games, piano, baking, lots of good stuff. Okay. All right. All right.
Too bad there's no exercise.
Let me ask you this though. That's fine. That's fine. So let me ask you this. Are you more of a homebody? Do you pretty much stay close? Are you out and about? I mean, obviously now is a bit of a different time, but what's your preference in that one?
I do tend to be a homebody, but I do love, when I love to get out, I love to get out. Right, I will go all in.
When you go out, go big or go home.
Let's not go out for an hour. It's go out for like 22 hours nonstop. Let's do like a hiking deep into the woods kind of thing.
All right. So it's go big or go home. All right, that's fair. All right, so for me, I've got 5 little ones under 10, expecting number 6 here in another week or two. So my 5 to 9 is very much family, full of family stuff. And actually, I would say my 9 to 5 is actually as well. It's pretty common for them to come busting in here. In fact, they have on the show. So that's, now again, like what that looks like is very different. We're homebodies. We are definitely homebodies, largely because leaving our property is just way too much work. It's just too much work. It's just much easier to stay home than to do anything else. But it's outside. It's all this other stuff. Love watching movies with the kids. Paw Patrol movie 5 stars. I would give it 5 stars along with Vivo. Pretty good. Same with Loud House. They came out with a good movie too. So anyway, but that would be pretty much mine. My wife and my kids are a big part of that. So let's transition from that, because now we're talking about talent development. Let's move over to this. Now, you're from Schoox, which some people may have seen the first episode. Some might not have. Some might be familiar with Schoox. Some might not. But let's talk a little bit about that first, the elevator kind of. What is Schoox, in case people are wondering?
Schoox is a modern learning and talent development platform really designed for the frontline worker. So we have highly flexible configuration to support very dynamic needs, whether you are still tethered to paper training, whether you've moved fully online digital and you've gone all in with performance and goals and on the job checklist and social and collaboration, or somewhere in between.
Okay. So taking it, well, because I think that's when we had first talked last time, I think that was one of the things where and sometimes when people ask, what's, because I get asked all the time, this platform, that platform, what do you think? For me, it's like, well, where Schoox, I think, is one of your specialty areas is you do have that end-to-end talent development that meets an organization where they may be. They may not have the maturity and they may need that full end-to-end. They may say, we have some of these other pieces in place and we just need components of it, and you can meet them there. So if that's a fair assessment.
Absolutely fair.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, that's good, because if you said you were way off, Christopher, I'd be like, I have to go back and edit so many of my conversations now. Woo! Thank goodness. Thank you, Matthew. I feel better. I'll be able to sleep well tonight.
Glad I could do that for you on a Friday.
Well, thank you, because that would have made kids' movie night tonight just that much worse had you not done that for me. So much appreciated. So let's talk about talent development, though, in the sense of this word gets thrown around a lot. I mean, we hear this, oh, we're developing talent, we're, reskilling, upskilling, we're doing all this. But I really want your definition when you talk to an organization and they say, hey, we're looking at improving our talent development. How do you help hone that in? Because to me, I think of the Princess Bride, where people may say, whatever, that word doesn't mean what you think it means. So where do you stand on the definition?
Where to even start? So for me, talent development is much broader than just the learning, the training, as it were. It's really incorporating other elements that can drive success sustainably. So I think about intertwining learning and performance in particular. For me, is that loose definition around talent development, making sure we've got the skills, the competencies in place so we understand what we're impacting, how we're impacting, why we're impacting, and how those things ultimately support career growth, career development, as well as aligning to your organization's goals. Okay.
I like it. All right. I'm going to, that'll tweet well, Matthew. Thank you. But what would you, yeah. You're just giving me all sorts of great stuff. But I think the point you bring up, and this is something that is an opportunity for a lot of organizations, is, and you talked about this, is it's the integration of these different components. I think sometimes we fall into the mix of siloing learning separately from these other components. And that again goes back to, where is Schoox playing? Well, it's working to integrate these things, because again, they don't work personally. I don't see them work real well independently. And I think that's one of the opportunity areas for learning and development, is that sometimes we're so focused on just the learning side of things and the experience, and did they do it, and was it a good experience, and did we change behavior along the way? But it's not really anchored back to anything. It's lacking that anchor, and as a result, it ends up just being an event or an activity, even when we build a really robust learning experience where we go, well, this is over time and we've made it very comprehensive. It's like, but what's it anchored to? And I think that's what you're getting at with the talent development of, Well, but is it tied to a capability or an organizational initiative? Do we have performance goals associated with it that then takes this from I learned something and you actually developed me as a professional for the benefit of me and the organization?
100%. I've seen it also really not work well when done in silos. And right, it's funny. I've said for years and years, as a guy that's been in learning and a guy that's been in HR, why can't we just be friends? Why can't we get along? Why can't we have meaningful conversations, even when we report to the same boss? Like, can we not just put our pieces together for the greater good? Oftentimes, what I've seen where it's siloed is you've got a really extensive approach to recruiting competencies, right? How do we gate
Yes.
to get people in the organization and really get that right profile? But then we bring you in, and I never see those competencies ever again. They only come up because we're trying to justify some compensation through our performance review process, which might be based on those same competencies, but nowhere in between do I ever see those things emerge again. And right, it's why performance became this anxiety ridden once a year, people want to hide from it.
Right, because it's like, hey, here's a bunch of stuff that you haven't heard about since we hired you, but now you're being measured against it, but we haven't had these conversations, and you're a 3. What?
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you.
Good to know. Well, I did take this course. Okay, but that had nothing to do with any of these things that you didn't know about that you're being held accountable for.
Yes.
Okay. Well, and I think we're making jokes a little bit because, well, I'm wearing a dad joke shirt, so we got to keep it light. But I think the point that we're making is an important one, which is this is the reality that I think a lot of times employees deal with. And it goes, when we say end to end, that's what we're talking about, is this idea that we build these things, we recruit, we hire, we bring people into a role in an organization based on things. That's not always talking to our performance management or our succession planning or our talent mobility strategy. That's a completely separate thing. And then you've got learning over here that's doing all this development activity, but it's not connected to this from start to finish for an employee in their employee journey. There's no connection between those. And like you said, although now you said, why can't we be friends? I have You've Got a Friend in Me from Toy Story running through my head. Thank you
And
for that.
you're welcome again. You're welcome again. I do have a couple of Toy Story potato heads kind of looming over here.
Good to know.
Out of camera.
So I do want to ask this, and then I want to shift gears to how we're seeing this change. What have been, because you've obviously been with Schoox for a bit, you've worked with a lot of organizations. We talk about this. We talk about the fact that it's disconnect. And I've got my perspective based on what I've seen. But what do you see that leads to some of this? What leads to this, hey, you stay over there? Because it's not a legit, I mean, I think there are some times where it is a legitimate kind of competitive thing. But I think a lot of times it's not necessarily an intentional thing. What have you seen with organizations where they're struggling with this?
Most often, what I have come to find through my own experiences and then looking through the lens of our customers is technology is typically at the core of the problem.
Really?
And what I mean by that is that we bring technology into our organization to try and facilitate whatever processes we have. Right? Like we say, oh, we have this recruitment process. Let's go grab a recruitment system and bing, bang, boom, we're done. Half the time, we don't have a process, and we go get the technology and we build a process around the technology. And then you end up with the siloed talent management suite, right, like the modules were all built for a very specific purpose with a very specific audience in mind. And so performance is designed to facilitate the performance process, which was not architected to play nice with learning. And so you end up with that. If you go just kind of back in time and peel back the layers, you start to find that companies have brought in technology and they built those processes around the tech. Even if they change out the tech, they don't go back and fix the processes.
Don't fix the process. No, it's okay. All right. So there's two parts to that. And I think this shifts, if you're in learning and development, it can shift how you're thinking about this a little bit, in that at first, when you were going the tech, I was about ready. I was getting ready for battle here because I'm like, well, wait a minute, because tech isn't the problem, the solution to your problem. But where you got with it, I completely agree with the fact that those conversations often for organizations weren't happening in the beginning. And like you said, they said, we need a better recruiting platform. Our recruiting experience is terrible. So they go get a recruiting platform, and it's not tied to anything. It's just a specific thing they grabbed. And then talent management says, we need a 360 survey tool to be able to do that. And they go out and buy it, but it's not tied to anything. Mm-hmm. And I think this goes back to, I've been trying to encourage people in the space to say, this goes back to system architecture. We in HR and learning and talent need to have a much more ecosystem architecture approach to what we're doing versus this piecemeal, I just grab whatever I think I need in the moment that solves a problem. Because, and this came up in a poll I ran yesterday, we say integrations, we throw that around like popcorn in a movie theater. Come on. It is not as easy as people would like to think to just say, hey, let's just make all these things talk and it'll be this beautiful symphony of technology that works. So I think, you know, that's what you're getting at, if I'm hearing you correctly. And I would 100% align on that piece then.
It's, you know, when you go select the learning system, there's a good chance you didn't bring in your HR business partners to talk about how performance plugs into the process so that you're informing the decision and you're actually opening that dialogue with other parts of the business. I'm a big fan of more people in the room for the conversations, if for nothing else than just to challenge my perspective. Challenge, I try to stay outside the box, but sometimes you just get put in the box because the tech or the process or the culture of the organization imposes some of those restrictions. And so how do we break through that? So when we get all the diverse perspectives in the room and we start hearing what's important to other people, so we can really put them together.
Well, and that's not always a popular message to hear because it's always one of these, but I want to move fast. We have this problem, this fire we need to put out right now. And so we need to go put this out. We don't have time to sit and try and solve for that. And I think that often exacerbates this problem because now you've gone and you might have put a Band-Aid on the Hoover Dam that's cracking down the center, but it ain't going to hold once things start moving.
You should, right, it's that the three-legged stool that you really don't want to compromise any of the legs. You want it fast, cheap, or good. Right, oftentimes you see people drive, I want it cheap, and we make concessions, or I want it fast, and we make concessions. When we say good, we focus there, and all of a sudden it's not as cheap and it's not as fast, but we get a much better product at the end.
Well, and Rudy brought this up, and I'll kind of tie to this because it ties to this conversation. It happens in learning and development with our LMS systems or with our LXPs or whatever. And sometimes, again, I think the intent isn't always malicious. So when we think about this, I just think of times where we've implemented an LMS and it had skill capability built into it. And in well-meaning ways, the L&D team has said, we should create a skills framework. And that's been done outside of the collaboration with the HR talent management team. And so now we've created a new skills taxonomy in the learning management system that is completely and distinctly different from the performance management system, which is completely distinctly different from the talent acquisition system. And so now we've got skill taxonomies all over the place in this space. So
one of the recommendations that I make to customers when we get into that early engagement, we start having the conversation about skills and what are you doing with skills and are you doing anything? Many times if we hear, no, we intend to, right? Like it was a plan, we just haven't been able to get to the plan yet. My first reaction is, are you friends with anybody in recruiting? If not, maybe you should become friends with somebody in recruiting and go ask a question, because I guarantee you there's something that you can start to work with there, at least to be inspired by.
Yep. And I think that's just the phrase that I don't remember where I heard it, but I use a lot is a lot of times our intent is to move fast, but what we don't realize is we're running on a treadmill, versus if we go slow to go fast and say, look, go ask these questions, go connect with these other groups, go see what else is out there. You actually might be able to move quicker versus sitting down and trying to knock all this stuff out. Now, Krista brought up a fair point that oftentimes HR L&D may not be have the final say in this. And that is a legitimate challenge where we may say, hey, look, we think we need to do this from an ecosystem standpoint, and we get overruled by ops or by finance or by someone like that. Realistically, I mean, I think some of those things do happen. That said, I think to your point, I think there's opportunity where there's still things that we can do within it. There are still things we can do within it to align what we have, to stop before we move forward. The other piece you brought up that I think is a really important one is when you have one of these major shifts, don't just put garbage into the new system. I have to imagine that's something that is probably a point of conflict or contention sometimes with clients on your end where, hey, we want to get the new end-to-end talent development system. So here's all our broken stuff. How do we make it work in Schoox?
Yes, that right. Like here's all our documents. Let's put them online. Well, that's right. That's not digitizing your learning. That's digitizing the access to the documents. Or right, they're building. A lot of times we see if we bring people over from another system, they've built their learning and oriented it to how the system works. So that sort of played a big part in their strategy of, well, I have to slice the content this way, or I only am able to bring in one type of content, or I can only have one scope per course. And so that changes how you think about structuring your learning. And much like with our employees, when they come to Schoox with our customers, we have the same conversation. Let's help you unlearn some of the things that you've learned and been conditioned to over time so that you can free up that headspace to really go and explore the possibilities.
Okay. And it's, I mean, I think one of the things we can joke and we can laugh a little bit about it, but at the same time, this is tough work. This is tough work. And I do not want to understate that at all, that, oh, just do this and it'll be fine. No, I mean, I've gotten beat up pretty bad, and there have been battles that I've lost where I've said this is the right thing to do. And similar to Krista's point, I've lost that battle. I've lost that battle where it's, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to do it this way. And I think then at that point, that's where you have the opportunity to say, well, if that is what we're doing, then rather than just throwing our hands up and saying, well, forget it, I guess we'll just go with the flow, instead saying, well, what can we do with what we've been given and the direction that we are going, and trying to make the best of it. Because there have been times where I've lost that battle, had raised concerns of the output or the downfall we were going to have as a result of that, didn't let anybody forget that, and just watched for 6 months as everything happened that you predicted is going to happen. And it does then create opportunity to say, remember when we said we could have avoided this had we done this? And I've actually had decisions reversed. I've had the complete direction shifted because you were able to do that. And I think that's one of the things, the willingness to stick with it can be worth the effort.
I actually read a quote this morning that's very right. Sometimes you just wonder why these things get put in your path. It's in my path because of this conversation. The quote really talked about, if the plan doesn't work, change the plan, not the goal.
Yep.
Right? Like, just keep driving toward that goal. Sometimes you got to get there a different way. One of the things that I've seen that has been able to change the game with that CFO decision point. Oftentimes in my career, I have been vetoed by various leaders in the organization. In hindsight, I realized that a lot of the veto came because I was in a reactionary stance. I was fighting fires all the time, and I didn't have data to be able to substantiate what I was proposing. That skills plug-in to the conversation allows me to actually come back and say, well, we're here, and in order to get to that goal, we have to improve these things, and we know where we're starting. We can invest time and energy and money, and we can move the needle on these things, which are directly tied to the success of those goals or objectives for the company.
Well, and what you're getting at, and this is just from some of my experiences in the past, and this was a lesson learned the hard way early on, was this whole influencing of these things. So often we go into these conversations highlighting the value for us, right? Highlighting the value that we see. Imagine, and we're using language that's important to us. We're using use cases that matter to us. This is going to help us improve our operations. It's going to improve. And honestly, the response is often, so what? I don't care about that. Now, it's easy to get frustrated with that and be like, but you should, because and you end up going into all the reasons trying to convince people that they should care about that. And it's a fruitless exercise, because the attitude is still, okay, yeah, I get you think this is really, I don't. And this is where it can get contentious, because then it can turn into this whole, yeah, your L&D, the HR problems aren't my problems type of a thing. And then it turns into, well, they are. And you end up in this war between each other, which actually does more damage than good, versus similar to what you're saying, you need to better represent this as, this is what it's doing for you. You've told me this is the pain point you're experiencing. Here's how this is going to work. As a good example, there was an employee experience platform that I was trying to implement, and it was a similar thing. People had tried to push it through, I don't know how many times, and it had failed miserably. And when I got into it, it was because I dug into, well, what are the cases that we've used before? None of them had to do with what the business operations teams cared about. It was all us. It was all the things we wanted and what we thought it would improve learner experience and da 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 da. I mean, all words that I can tell you right now, you could hear the eyes rolling back into the business leaders' heads. And when we shifted the conversation, it did make, we got it. We had it within 6 months. We completely reversed trajectory by doing that. So I think it's a really important point.
We, oftentimes we start the learning design conversation with what's the with them, right? Like, how do we get inside the head of our learners to make the point to them of why it's important to them? But then when we go to build a business case, that goes out the window. Like we could apply the same tools and just treat everything as we're building learning. We're building some sort of mini change management initiative, and we should lead with that. What's in it for them, and then work backward to make sure we substantiate how we got there.
Yeah. And on top of that, I think the piece that is important to note on that is sometimes there are, going back to this, we joke that, well, they should care about this, but it's not always, again, a malicious, I don't care about it. It's just it's not on the top of my priority list. So if I have to make a decision about these things that are fires burning for me, or this thing that you say is important, and I agree it's important, but it's not top of my list, that's not necessary. And I think that's sometimes where we can get frustrated, is we feel like, well, the business just isn't making development a priority. It's not making HR a priority. It's like, well, they are, but they're not seeing it through the same lens. And so I think that's the way we have to be able to paint that picture. To your point, we do this in learning and development. We help our end users see the value for them, but oftentimes we don't when it comes to systems, things like that.
It's always a good idea to go and ask, I share this with our customers all the time, poke your head into a couple of doors, virtual doors as it may be these days, but go ask questions, not in a, I'm seeking to understand the audience analysis, or like I'm building something for the company and I need you to verify that I'm building the right thing, but just go ask questions to understand what matters to people. Understand each leader in the organization, where their priorities are, and then you can connect by taking the things you're doing and making them relevant to that particular, right? When I'm talking to the CFO, if I know that what matters to them is keeping a tight, balanced budget, then I can frame up whatever I'm doing in that context to show how it will enable them to have that experience they're looking for.
Yeah.
Then they care even more because it's like, oh, so you're going to help me do lifting.
Well, and I think, and this is just a mindset shift that it, man, this is not the direction I was anticipating us going with this, but it's really good stuff because this is honestly, especially right now, I cannot tell you how many learning leaders I talk to who are in the throes of being told you need to digital, and they know they need to, and they're being tasked with it, and they're being asked to bring in new technology, and they're going, I am struggling right now. I'm having a hard time with this. I see it. I have these great things. I'm trying to position it, and I just keep getting shot out of the sky. I just keep getting shot out of the sky. And it can feel like, how the heck am I supposed to change anything if nobody will let me actually change the things? And a lot of times in this, it's about, well, take a look in the mirror, because it might actually be you that's the biggest bottleneck in actually getting these changes. And that point you brought up, I think sometimes from a mindset standpoint, we cannot want to surrender like our position on why it's good. Like, it's like, but I want it for this, and I have to make them see that. And it's like, no, you don't. Because if your goal is to get what you're trying to get, going to your point earlier, you said the goal is when you get shut down, you don't move the goal, you move the pathway to the goal. It's the same thing. If your goal is, we need to implement, I don't know what it is, we'll throw something out there, right? We really need a more robust capability for digital learning. Fine. If you know you need that, but you're told, well, you position this, you pitch this, and no, we're not doing that. We're not going to make that kind of investment. If your goal is just to convince them that's the thing, instead of the goal is to get this capability, you're never going to make it. You're never going to make it. And I think that's the point of, let go of your own stuff and figure out, I'm just going to throw that to the wayside. My goal is just to influence this person to be on board with what we're doing.
Yes. It's a really, really difficult mind shift to make, but once you do it once, you feel it. And it's powerful.
It is. Well, and I just, like I said, thank you, Rudy. I said this was not the direction we were planning, but at least it's being well received. So, Rudy, I'm glad you're finding value in the complete redirect with where we're going, because we were going to be talking about talent, and now we're talking about some of these challenges that we face with this. Because whether it's Schoox or whatever, these are, I cannot tell you how many of these things I've gone into where I've gone and said, we need this. And it's just been met with, well, we don't have budget right now. We don't have time. This group over here, there have been many times where the other group's overspent and you're underspent. So we're going to actually take your underspend and give it to this other. And you're going, are you kidding me? You are pinning me into a no-win situation where I have absolutely no cards. And I can say from my side, when you shift your mindset, you can always find new cards to play.
Yes.
Always find new cards to play on that.
Learning is my entire career. Learning has always been the first place that the business goes when they need to take money, and it's the last place they go when there's extra money to give. And once I recognized that and stopped trying to fight it, I leaned into it and said, okay, this is the reality. Mostly because there's just a lot of what we do that is not as visible. It's not as tangible as, right? Like I reduced my sales by 20, or reduced my turnover by 20%. I increased my sales by 10%. Those things are very tangible. Learning is often looked at as the fluffy stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's warm and fuzzy and right. But once I leaned into that and said, okay, so it's not really about whether or not I have the budget, because the reality is I'm probably never going to have the budget I need.
Right.
It's
you
about
accept that. You accept that to be true.
Yes. So now how do I make the most out of what I do have? And if I know that there's some other place in the business that's going to have the money, how do I partner with them to figure out how what I'm doing can help them meet their goals, which ultimately right now I can get a piece of that budget. I get that investment. from the business. Just all about creativity.
Yeah. Well, and I think, this again goes back. I love the point you made about sometimes it's just accepting the reality that we have. And we might not like that reality, right? We might not like that reality, that, well, you know what? We probably are always going to be one of the first things that gets cut. Our budgets are we probably are always going to fight for our budget in the beginning of the year when other groups are not. And that's not fun. And I would love to change that. And it does. The thing I will tell you is, from my experience, that does change when you start getting it right. Because when you start delivering wins on these things and you start nailing things down, suddenly when you come to the table and go, hey, you know what we need? We need to do this. And you've delivered more than, as Nancy brings up, more than just completion data.
Yes.
Suddenly they start listening and going, well, last time we had this problem, L&D brought this up and it solved our problem. Maybe we ought to give them a crack at this because they've done this now 3 times in a row before. And I think this is something worth pursuing. Again, I've got so many use cases in my head or examples where, and this is part of why I do Learning Tech Talks, is it's really important for learning and development people to know what the different possibilities are so that they can know what's out there. Because the strategy that I found to be so effective in this is, you know what you can do based on the technology that's out there. You wait to hear those pain points in the organization. You sit in those business meetings, as you said, and you listen. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? And when you hear one that you go, I know how we could solve that. Bam. Like, that's when you strike and go, I think I can do that for you. I think what you just said, I can do that. And I know how we're going to, and all of a sudden the ears perk up and they're like, how? Tell me how. Well, let me pull some things together. Let me get some things, but I think actually we can make this case. And next thing you know, you're not paying for it. You have zero budget, but it's okay because now you've just convinced your CFO, your COO, whatever, your VP of regional ops, that you've got a solution to their problem and they're willing to fund it because they've got the budget.
Absolutely. It's fun when that happens. And I've also, in my own career, there were times where I couldn't get into the conversation as the L&D guy.
It's true.
But
we're not always invited.
We're not always invited. But when you realize the vast amount of tools that L&D people have in their toolkit, I draw parallels all the time between L&D and change management. Right? There's powerful stuff when we start to look at what it takes to manage change, what it takes to get people moved from point A to point B, and do it with a positive attitude and with the right behavioral shift. Why not take those skills and apply them? We facilitate conversations all day long. We help uncover needs. We help people translate, right? When they're talking, they're saying the same thing with different words and can't seem to find a connecting point. We can listen and go, oh, so what you're actually saying is this and this. Same thing. Let's just move it forward. I've been able to get a seat at the table by using some of those skills, but not being there as L&D. And that also gives a little bit of credibility that, right, it's that personal capital that you can rack up and then start to use to help open the door for L&D.
Okay. So you know what? I figured out a way to bring this all back around. So this is actually perfect because, again, we're going with this fact that the problem we're dealing with in L&D is we're being asked to do all this stuff. We're being digitally transformed. We've got an upskilling crisis. I mean, legit upskilling crisis in our organizations. We've got all this stuff, and we're often sitting here with, pool floaties as swords and things right? Like, we're like, come on, we got it. I'm going to try and get it. And we know what we can do, or we should. There are things that we can do to try and solve this. And we can feel like we're losing, but let's talk about this because, see, here's the transition. So the transition that goes into, over the last 18 months, I feel like the field has been ripe with opportunity as a result of what came out of this pandemic. We have had more opportunity to say, hey, you have a problem. We're vanilla ice right now, saying we can solve it, type of a thing. And we legitimately can. It's not smoke and mirrors action. We actually have things where we go, oh, that There's something we can do for that. There's something we can do for that. There's something we can do for that from a talent development standpoint. So let's transition to that, how we've seen this shift. See what I did there?
Right.
Let's talk about what you're seeing, and I'll share some of the things I'm seeing in the conversations I'm having of what are some of these pain points that tie to talent development that you're seeing organizations going, we've really got to fix this, so that people can kind of hear some different opportunities that may not have existed or may not have been high enough on the priority list for people to really get anyone's attention that they can go for.
All right, that was a really slick transition, by the way. That's a like five-star gold medal stuff there. I think, over the last 18 months, it's been interesting to watch L&D really be elevated to this front row position. We are no longer a luxury. We're no longer viewed as that soft and fluffy thing over there that just makes people feel good and they have a lot of fun, but not really sure what they do. It really has, as we watched businesses go through the transformation, first in that initial phase where we had to shut down and in some cases furlough, in some cases change our entire business model. What it did is it opened the conversation. The companies that came through that really, really strong were the companies that said, okay, you know what? We don't like it, but let's make the most of it. So we have this period where we're insulated from just the chaos of whatever it was before. Different kind of chaos, but the business can actually pause for a minute and reevaluate. Let's take this quiet time to evaluate, is our tech right? Is it helping advance our case? Is it actually an enabler to what we're trying to accomplish? They're reevaluating the learning strategy because let's face it, the world is not the same as it was 18 months ago. And the training I was delivering to people 18 months ago doesn't hold up.
Even if it was really good.
Right.
Even if what you were doing was really good, it's kind of like, well, that's not really relevant anymore.
As my business has changed, my personal world has changed, which has shifted my perspective. My customers have a different perspective, a different set of needs. My employees have a different set of needs. And so we have to figure out how we stack all those things together. And in short, what's happened is a lot of L&D has finally been able to lift out or start mobilizing out of that firefighting reactionary mode and actually engaging in this skills first type conversation where it's, let's look at what we know are the core critical things to enable success. And let's just focus on how we rally the company to build those things infinitely, because those things give us the flexibility. Doesn't matter if I don't know that process, if I can equip you with the underlying competency or skill to put the process together, that's where we make our money back for the business.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just it. We're past the, like you said, for the most part, I would say most organizations are past the dumpster fire stage where it's sheer pandemonium, chaos running around, just trying to make sure that things don't completely go under. And now we are in this state where I think people thought it was going to snap back. I think a lot of organizations thought, well, it'll snap back. But now, to your point, they're realizing it's not. And not even just, even if we open offices back again and like you said, our customers are different. The attitudes of the workforce are different. The skills they need to reach our customers, the way we do business and our business strategy have fundamentally changed. And I would say in every organization I talk to, those conversations are happening at the business level. I mean, across the board, they are having those conversations of like, how are we going to rethink about that? And what I think the point here that we can take is we can sit and wait for that to happen and then react to it, which in many regards, if we're honest, that's been L&D's MO. We kind of have waited to see, well, what's the business going to do? And then we'll react to that. Versus now we have this prime opportunity to lean into that conversation and say, I've got some pretty good ideas about what we know. And honestly, while L&D may not have always been ahead of things, there are certain areas we were more prepared for this than a lot of other functions. we were more prepared for digital collaboration and digital type, experience and digital content design and some of these things that the rest of the organization didn't necessarily really have much foot on. And now they're going, we got to figure this out. And if you don't know those conversations are happening, they are. And that's where this is like the prime time to come in and go, I know, even if you're taking a wild stab at it, you're probably going to hit something pretty close. If you're like, I know this is probably going on right now. And I think there's something we can do proactively that can get in front of this.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, I don't think I've heard anybody has taken a shot at one of those and completely missed the goal. They might have clinged the, goalpost on the way through, but they've landed somewhere on the green because of the just current state of business right now.
Yes. There is no shortage of stories of what you just described, customer after customer. If I just think about personally how I've interacted with businesses, I'm always that guy. I walk into a business and I'm like, I'm here to buy a shirt. So tell me what your training's all about, right? How do you feel? How does it make you feel? Are you connected? Are you engaged? Do you like it? And what I've started to hear from the employee population where businesses are making the change is that it's being felt. Employees actually are signaling, you're getting it right. Because it's not about the old mindset prior to 2020 was, how do we get people to do training? We tell them to do it.
Yep.
Right. What are we tracking? What's the metric? It's my completion. It's my compliance. Well, the second you slap a mandate on something, you immediately squash the excitement, the enthusiasm, the engagement, which means I show up with my brain already half closed because I'm grumbling that I got to do it because you told me I got to do it. Businesses have taken a different look at how to really engage talent, and they stack it together, anchoring in something like career development, right? We're here not just to teach you how to do your job. We're here to try and uncover what matters to you and where you want to go and how we can better facilitate that journey to keep you here. Everything has more purpose.
Well, and I think organizations, and again, this just goes back to being able to speak the same language that's going on at the business level. In many regards, the business is saying, we're realizing how important it is for our employees to understand our vision, because that's a differentiator. Is this great, exiting of employees? A lot of it's due to, they're not happy in their job, but two, they don't feel connected to what the organization's doing. They just feel like they're listlessly showing up to work. And so you look at some of those core things that are going on, you can start using that same narrative for some of the things that we're trying to do from an HR standpoint, so you can align it to the bigger vision. Well, if we as an organization are trying to create a better vision and create more clarity for the employees to what the company's doing, boy, it sure sounds like there's a prime opportunity to say in talent development, we're trying to streamline and align what we're trying to do so that employees know this is my development and how that connects to everything all the way up to the business. And now it doesn't sound like a nice to have HR priority. It sounds like, wow, holy cow, that's actually exactly what we're trying to do at an enterprise. What do you need to do to be able to pull that off? And now that conversation is something where you're talking about the same thing, maybe slight different application of it, but you're on the same page.
That collaboration across the business, I don't even know another word to use to describe it when it happens other than magical. It's like everything lines up, right? Things line up and you start to get momentum and you feel it's just not as hard to push because you've got a team that's aligned to push it with you.
Yeah. Well, and Boss brought up a good question that I haven't seen a lot of this come out yet, right? I don't know if anybody's doing any formal studies. If anybody knows of any, I'd love to have some shared, in the comments or email them over to me. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing is if you're watching closely what's going on, there's enough stuff. Like I said, if you take a shot right now, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the world, you can take a shot and hit the goal for the most part. And I think that's where some of these lessons learned, we can make some pretty strong assumptions right now based on where the organizations are going. We know where these talent gaps are sitting. We know there's a lack of really understanding in the workforce of what are my skills and really what do I do with them and how does that align to the company mission. We know this hybrid workforce thing, it ain't going anywhere, period. It ain't going anywhere. And so if, those things are not fully integrated into your system, that's not a change that's going to be happening. And realistically, I just even think some of the digital transformation work that I've done here and in previous orgs, that actually ended up turning into business work because what we were doing, we said, well, we could apply this to what you're doing on the business side. And it ended up getting us funding and, priorities around things that we would have never got across the finish line before. So did you have something else on that one?
No, I was trying to think if there was something else I could contribute, but all I could say was, yeah, I agree. You said it. A lot of tweet-worthy things in there.
Not really. It was quite exhaustive. But so let me ask you this though, on this one with the talent development, what are some of the things that you're seeing shift with the way organizations are approaching the talent piece? Because again, we say that yes, talent development's more of a priority, things like that. Are you seeing any fundamental shifts in the way organizations are looking at it, or are there specific skill? I'm just trying to think, what big things have you seen? Because on the vendor side, this is why I love talking to vendors. You see this on company after company after company after company. What have been some of those other big plays that have tides that have turned for you?
I think generally speaking, the way that organizations look at talent has been shifted quite a bit. And what I mean by that is I've seen company after company really rethink how the work gets done, rethink how they organize the work, and that changes the scope of role definition. So we're seeing a lot of new hybrid type roles come together that blend some of the work processes so that you start to tear the silos down by just actually having people working across multiple disciplines intentionally.
Okay.
The other thing that I've seen, culture, specifically like having culture fit. It's something that my whole entire career I've always heard, yeah, we want to make sure you're a fit for the culture. That has gone really high up on the list because the culture of the organization, right? When you find people that are a fit for the culture that help really amplify your efforts to deliver on your mission and your vision, we can teach you a lot of the skills that we need to teach you, but what we can't teach you are those innate qualities that just make you a fit. And so there's been a new focus on that, which then makes it a little more difficult to tie skills to, because sometimes those two things aren't as clear cut. But it has opened the conversation for that skill discussion more and more. I would say 18 to 24 months ago, talking with customers about this idea of connectivity between skills and your learning for the outcome of business impact and performance improvement. What I heard 2 years ago was, yeah, that makes sense. We'll get there. Right. We'll phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, we'll get there. Now that is a top number one priority coming into the door.
Okay. Well, and that's actually a really interesting piece that I think anybody in learning can kind of walk from this discussion with is because I agree in the sense that it's moved from a we really should do this to a we need to do this. I think where I'm seeing there be a divergence, and I think one's going to work well and one's not necessarily going to hit the mark, is that focus is where you hear skilling, reskilling, upskilling, right skilling, whatever cool buzzword is associated with it. And where I see sometimes this goes south is the emphasis is becoming more on, well, how do we improve the skill development, which I think can be a good thing. But where I see it missing the mark, and you tell me if this ties to what you're saying, is we're still not necessarily scratching beneath that surface of wait. We need to fundamentally make sure we're defining what the core skills are and how those tie across the whole development life cycle. Because some of the things you just shared, roles are changing. Roles are becoming, they're bleeding together. Organizations are combining and things like this, which causes chaos up here on the surface. But underneath, the skill piece isn't changing if we've actually scratched under the surface and said, okay, well, here's the core skills and here's how we can map and measure those core skills. So I think for learning and development professionals, it's an important time to say, hey, if you're really going to get traction on this, don't just keep improving on the experiences or the things that you're doing today, but actually go back to the core of it and say, well, wait a minute, do we really even know what skills we're talking about that we're then developing and growing and then measuring and managing? Because if you do that, that now builds a strong business case all the way across the talent life cycle.
Exactly that. It gives you the foundation that is solid enough and stable enough to build from, but it also gives you the individual parts and pieces that allows you to rearrange and flex. The one thing, if we come away from the last 18 months with nothing else, we come away with this understanding that change, right? It happens. It's going to steamroll us. Just when we think we figured it out, we're going to get another surprise. And so we have to look at how we build for flexibility, how we build for adaptability over time. And that skills discussion is where we start.
Okay. And so from that standpoint, and this goes back to the Schoox side, whether it's Schoox, whether it's whatever it is, but that, and I think this needs to be something that we're looking at the core of anything that we're evaluating is how are we actually managing that? And I think that's where Schoox ties into this, is helping organizations figure that out. Because again, without that core infrastructure, that core foundation, we're really running on a treadmill to nowhere with this. It's not only not necessarily tapping into the employees with them of, okay, what's in this for me from a career development standpoint, but it's also leading to a lot of activity that doesn't necessarily tie back or map back to anything that ultimately, even when this all blows over, then there's going to be nothing that we can showcase and say, well, look what we did. Look what we were able to accomplish with that. All right. Okay. Well, there's one more area I want to go into, but we're at 58 minutes and you have to get on a plane to fly to ATD. So I don't think we're even going to be able to scratch the surface on this one. So I'm going to hold it. I'm going to actually take a strategic pause. I've used that. I've learned that's a terminology that you can use when you want to just stop the conversation. So we're going to take a strategic pause on this conversation to let Matthew catch his flight. But hopefully, again, while not the direction I originally intended, I think we really did hit on some of these important factors around, hey, like I get we're in a tough spot right now, but there is a ton of opportunity if you do it right. And then on top of it, some of the steps that we can take to actually do this right and solve some of these shared problems, which skills is a shared problem. That's not an HR L&D problem right now. That is a business problem across the board, which is creating tremendous opportunity for us. So, Matthew, I appreciate you making the time to come back to join me here and talk about all this fun stuff and just riffing along the way. It's a bit of a wild ride, but hey, that's how it goes. That's the spirit of it. So,
best conversations happen that way. I'm excited to be back, and after the strategic pause, I look forward to continuing our conversation.
It won't be our last time. I can promise you that, Matthew. And congratulations on the new role and everything you're doing over there at Schoox. Have a safe trip to ATD and look forward to staying in touch and having another conversation. Have a great Friday, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you. Actually, no, you know what? You're not going to see me next week because it's a holiday week. And then chances are there's a baby coming. So I have a bunch of pre-recorded ones, so I'll be streaming them. But anyway, you have a wonderful couple weeks, and I wish you all the best. Have a great weekend.